Hi folks, I'm Spencer, and on today's episode of Cult Mania we're getting punk with the Decline of Western Civilisation Trilogy, because I review documentaries now. For those of you who don't know, the Decline of Western Civilisation documentaries are primarily music documentaries, two of which are about punk, one of which is about metal, and they were directed by Penelope Spheeris, who most people will probably know for directing the funniest film ever made, Wayne's World. And they are... yes, they're about the music. They contain great live footage of, iconic and less iconic bands. But they're as much about the idea of subculture, and there's lots of interviews with fans as well as interviews with musicians. And they're just really great. I'm going to review them in sort of little sections for each film rather than discussing overall, technical stuff, because that'll just come up anyway and they share a lot, so it would be a bit ridiculous anyway. So, The Decline of Western Civilisation. This is about sort of hardcore punk in LA. This is, I think it came out in 81. I think the bulk of it was filmed in 79. And it's this very scuzzy, low budget documentary shot on film, 4x3, probably 8mm or 16, that just captures the vibe of LA punk. You've got Black Flag shown on it pre Henry Rollins, you've got X, you've got Germs, Fear, so many great bands, and it's one of those things where Penelope Spheeris had the most brilliant idea to make this, because you get properly recorded, great mixed audio, everything of these small little bands who have are now massively, if you're into alternative music, the names, but you're seeing them right at the time when no one else really would have bothered to film them. That's the key thing that you get out of the first film, is that you've just got this wealth of amazing concert footage and, people just losing their minds, lots of moshing, and you get these bits where really crappy subtitles come up to tell you that it's got, it captures that punk energy so well. The interviews themselves are not amazing. There's some bits. There's quite an extended conversation with the band X, which is really interesting. There are some other interviews. There's an interview with a punk fanzine magazine, which is sort of relatively interesting, but there are a few points where people just aren't particularly interesting to listen to. There's quite a prolonged interview with Darby Crash, who passed away before the film actually came out, which goes on a bit too long because he's not got a fat lot to say, really. Which is perhaps something that could be said about a lot of it. It's a little bit gangly, it's a little bit long, because a lot of people repeat the same things, but for that footage that they've got, and just for being honest, there are moments that are quite sad, or, it portrays the punk scene as something very cool, but also has a dark side to it. And yeah, it is a fantastic documentary. It's very, very, very interesting. It's actually probably my least favourite, despite the fact that the music in this one is the stuff I'm most interested in. Next up, we have the metal years. Unfortunately, this is 80s metal, and it's all very hair metal, and I will be right up front. The music in this one, poop. The concert footage itself is much... there's a lot more camera angles. It doesn't... it's professionally shot. but there is some pretty awful music in this one. That includes Megadeth. Yeah, I said it. But this one thrives in its interviews, in part because there are some, there are big names. Alice Cooper's interviewed, Lemmy, some of Aerosmith. It's got that proper vibe to it. It's a compared to the first film, this is like a proper documentary. And there are some really interesting interviews with people in hair metal bands. Be warned, misogyny up the wazoo in this one. Although in no way does it's the sort of film that has the ability to portray these people who have these horrible opinions and make you interested enough without in any way condoning them, and in a lot of ways sort of people painting themselves to be fucking Egypts, really. And it has some interviews, a lot more of the bands that you will see in this one no one remembers now. I know I mentioned Megadeth, but they are saved for the end, and as much as I am not a fan, they are a classic metal band. There are other bands in this one that you're just going to go, who? And then you will see them interviewed, and it is the most Spinal Tap thing, people attempting to look like they're the coolest people, and then they've got no money, no one goes to the shows. There's a great clip of one band, I cannot remember which band it is, sorry, unprofessional, where it looks like, the cameras are right up the front, and it looks like they're in this big, big venue, and there's loads of it, and then it pulls back, and there's 10 people there. It's just, to a degree, it's sad, but it's also hilarious because these people are knob ends. And there is possibly one of the best. There's a really great Ozzy Osbourne interview in this one, but the best interview in any of the documentaries probably is the interview with Chris Holmes from Wasp, where he is drunk in the middle of his pool, and he starts off being really weird and sort of funny, and just through through Spheeris being a brilliant interviewer, it becomes so sad as he sort of discusses his alcoholism, and this honesty just pours out of him, and you probably wouldn't get away with getting an interview like it today, but it's just a fantastic interview because it's got everything, and it like I said, I think because he's drunk, there's just an honesty about his alcohol abuse, and it's just really, I don't know, engaging, and like I said, you just don't see it. So yeah, two pretty crap music, but some fantastic interviews. Now we move on to part 3, which is about gutter punks, which is not something I really knew anything about. I don't think anyone will remember the names of the bands. Final Conflict, Naked Aggression, The Resistance. But that's part of the real charm of this, because it's about punk in the 90s as sort of pop punk is taking off, Offspring, Green Day, all that sort of thing. But it's not about that. It's about the small grassroots, still very hardcore styled punk. And it follows this is much more about the punks, the people, the fans than any of the other ones. Yes, those interviews were there in the others, but not to the degree that it is in this. This is really about the people, because yes, the music's interesting, but it's very much more of the. It's a continuation of the music that you heard in the first film. Not to dismiss the bands, because the music in this is actually pretty good. But it's much more about all these people. The punks that they're into are homeless, don't have jobs, and it's about that lifestyle and what it's like. and goes much more into how people found themselves getting into punk, and there's just the emotional stuff that happens towards the end of the set is carried through much more in part 3, and the characters, you know, of the interviewees are just really, really engaging. It works because you really take an interest in these individual people. You know, there's a sequence in which it shows them trying to, you know, just sort of busk for money, and it's so funny because so many of the people are really charming, and it portrays, again, it's the most, I think, where you go, punk really helps people, and despite, you know, the aggressive front, that there are real people underneath, and that they can be very nice and very charming. And really, I mean, there's songs in it about attempting to ban abortions and people, you know, in squats, and I think, and about homophobia, and it really shows that despite this being coming out in 98 when I was born, the world's not really got any better. It perhaps did, but it's gotten worse again, and it would be very interesting if we ever got a fourth, because now feels like the right sort of time, because everything's a bit shit, really, and yeah, sorry, I've just gone off into a little world of Jesus Christ, the world's crap, but at least we get good music out of it. Right, sorry, I've chilled out now. 3 is perhaps a bit more visually interesting. It's not. It goes back to that more sort of chaotic editing style and the sort of rougher concert footage. Like I said, there isn't nearly as much concert footage in 3. There's this mix between film stock and sort of tape or some sort of really early, you know, DV or something with scan lines across everything, which adds to the sort of punky vibe, because again, this is sort of much more grotty. Part 2 has this sort of very clean cinematic feel to it. This doesn't. And the interviews go back to like just having people sat next to like a light bulb and lots of zooming in, crashing around, blah 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 blah. And yeah, I genuinely, despite the fact that it has no bands that I think people particularly remember these days, 3 is the best one, because it has an emotional punch, some quite dark stuff discussed towards the end, but it's got the lightness, and the music is really good, and it will make you laugh, and it could make you cry, and that's what documentaries are really good for, because they capture a time and they capture the emotion of a time, and I think that's what all these do really well. And they work as sort of an archive and a document. Hence why, despite the fact that 2 is full of rampant misogyny, homophobia, is still very interesting, because it highlights the people that it's a version of, you know, it shows society and how society has and hasn't changed in the 40 years since that was made. It's, yeah, they're a fantastic musical archive, and if you have any interest in alternate music, I would highly recommend checking them out. Yeah, they're very, very good. I actually liked them all more this time that I watched them than the last time. Yeah, well worth a watch. But that is just my opinion. What do you think of the Decline of Western Civilization trilogy? Let me know down in the comments. Which is your favourite one? Like and subscribe so you don't miss any more videos, and I shall see you next time.